an emergency crossover edition of Locked On Horned Frogs and Locked On Baylor, because what was your favorite moment in the Gary Patterson Baylor era? We'll discuss next on this very special edition of Locked On Horned Frogs and Locked On Baylor, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right, Locked On Horned Frogs. Next to me is Cam Stuart from Locked On Baylor. Realize I made a typo there in the graphic as I was saying your name. But hey,
no one can spell it right anyway. So
yeah, no.
At least the thought was there. It was in the right spot.
It was. TCU education joke. Insert that here. Make Locked On Horned Frogs or Locked On Baylor your first listen. We appreciate those that do on a daily basis. And Cam, you're here today because your radio show, the Matt Mosley Show, had an exclusive interview with Gary Patterson. There was all this commotion about 6 months back. He took the Baylor job as an analyst. It was very strange. I guess besides your first reaction when he took that job of like, what bizarro world am I living in? What was kind of your thought on what his role could be this year for Baylor? And how surprised were you when you found out he's moving away from this job essentially before the season starts?
Yeah, well, first off, you do listen to that interview. I promise I am on the Matt Mosley Show. I typically am allowed to talk on the Matt Mosley Show, but we were in three different spots, so I'll give Mosley the benefit of the doubt there. Honestly, Steven, I think one of the big takeaways I had from the interview was the role that Gary Patterson had, because I think I got it completely wrong, and I think a lot of fans did too. But yeah, it was weird in February getting that message of Gary Patterson. That's interesting. I know he's dipped his toes in the TCU rivals pool of working with UT, but this just seemed odd. And so from the jump, I think a lot of people thought analyst, the way he was at UT. And come to find out through that interview on Friday that wasn't the case. He was a consultant, which we did know was his title, but to take consultant into a very realistic, like private sector type of term. I mean, he was there to, as he mentioned, to kind of help infrastructurally is the word I used, which I don't think is a real word, but looking at things like recruiting and things like NIL and the transfer portal and off-season workouts and things like that, and kind of making sure that stuff was in place. And I think from a Baylor standpoint, that makes a lot of sense, right? You've got a guy who is one of the best college football coaches the last 30 years, who was just a pinnacle of sustained success through a couple of different conferences and at a couple of different levels at TCU. I would love for that guy to let us know how our program is doing or what we could do in the off season to get better. Absolutely. And so that makes sense, but I think it's very different from what his UT role was, which sounded like almost the head coach of the defense, he was obviously helping with some of that other stuff too, like recruiting and workouts, but also it sounded like defensive game plans, which I think is a surprise to no one and would have been great to have here at Baylor. But he mentioned that working at UT, you had the head coach on the offensive side, and here at Baylor, you had him on the defensive side, even more hands-on on the defensive side this year. So that might have been a bit of a struggle. But yeah, I think that was a big thing, is that I got the job completely wrong. It still is kind of weird that a couple of days into fall camp, he's out the door after 6 months. But I think that starts to make a little bit more sense.
I got that wrong too. And I was honestly shocked when he said that, because I mean, I'm with you. When they hired him, I'm thinking, okay, he's X's and O's dude. Like, he's there to break down film and give you guys an evaluation of like, here's some things you need to do differently. He can be a sounding board from Dave, who's getting his hands more involved with the defense this year. And when he talked about evaluating NIL and portal and recruiting, I was just sort of taken aback, Cam, because frankly, like, that's the stuff that he failed at late in his tenure at TCU. Like, he didn't understand how the wind was shifting in college sports, and he got so set in his ways on, no, this is how I've done this for years. It's been successful. Like, I'm not changing. The people around me need to change, and the kids need to respond to what I'm doing. And they didn't. And ultimately, that's why he lost his job. So I guess I can see the value of, because he's talked about before at Texas, yeah, he was helping the defense, but he was also kind of secretly taking a lot of notes and saying, okay, what were we doing in this area? What are they doing? What's better? What's worse? But I just don't understand why I get like some of those things that you mentioned, having him as a person that's like, hey, why don't we do this? But I don't get why you hire Gary Patterson if you're going to use him as a dude who's just kind of like talking about big picture things with you.
Yeah.
Because that's never really been his strength in my mind.
Yeah. I mean, you think of Gary Patterson as the ball coach, right?
Yeah.
And like, that's interesting that you bring that up, because I had that thought too of like, that seemed to be the downfall here at TCU. And I think it's in a weird way a credit to TCU because they got ahead of it rather than Baylor, for example, falling behind in both those spaces, NIL and transfer portal, and not adjusting accordingly. Whereas TCU made a bold move to say goodbye to probably their best ever coach, like pretty quickly into that process. So it is kind of funny in that, like, yeah, I would love for him to help Baylor with recruiting, because Baylor's been on a slide in state and TCU was so great for years, getting guys, evaluating talent early over a UT and an A&M. But on the flip side, it's like recruiting is a different game now. It's a completely different game. And does Gary stack up to that? So I like that it happened, I guess, but we're never going to know the impact that Patterson had on this. And it is an interesting point of, he was the football coach and feels like a guy who would very begrudgingly go into this new era. Not quite kicking and screaming like Dabo. He's not a baby, but I don't think this is something that a college football that he totally loves either.
Matt sort of pushed him in the middle of the interview about, okay, like what really happened, because this doesn't, it didn't tend to, and in everybody's mind, it's like, this doesn't make sense. I guess just kind of straight up, does this pass the smell test to you, Cam? Because it does seem weird. He said, okay, him and Dave kind of had like a DTR in June, and they were sort of like, I feel like we've both done everything. Like, we both agree I've done everything I can do for you.
Yeah.
And it really makes sense. He kept saying he didn't want to be a distraction. And I'm just like, I mean, this is a big deal in our circles. I don't really know if like it's going to lead the national discussion every week that he's with Baylor. Like, I think, once the game started, it would kind of fall in the background. But I can't get out of my head that, because he did say multiple times, it's different because Dave is in the room with the defense. He's the guy. Steve Sarkisian was on the offensive side of the ball, so he didn't have as much interaction with him. Do you think there was any butting of heads, or just like maybe he didn't fully understand his role, what he was supposed to do, that led to kind of a, hey, let's maybe not do this anymore?
If the explanation was a restaurant up for inspection, it would pass with like an 81 and you need to have an 80. It's like, all right, we can keep you open. Because obviously we heard the distraction excuse a lot with Texas and his time there too. And the lengths he went to not try and steal any of the spotlight. But to his own point, like, yeah, it was easy because Sark was on the offense. Dave's not. And I don't think, this is speculation, but I don't think Dave Aranda is shedding any tears that Gary Patterson is no longer there. I think he has a great respect for him and has been inspired by him purely as a football coach. But I think there might have been a little too much ego in the defensive room with two head coaches, and one of them being very, very successful. I do think there's something more there that he's not going to tell us about, and did not tell us about on Friday. I think there is some fire to that smoke. It just wouldn't surprise me in the least from what we've seen with Dave Aranda in his time here at Baylor. And it's little things like, no longer talking to the media. Won't let his coaches talk to any of the media. If you had told me, hey, Dave Aranda and Gary Patterson broke up a little bit because Dave needed to be the head coach that he needs to be or wants to be. That wouldn't surprise me. That wouldn't surprise me in the least that he thought, I've got some good advice from Gary, but I don't really need this carrying over into the season. Which would, I think, lead to the question of did he want Gary there in the first place? I think Mac Rhodes, as the athletic director, really wanted him there and wanted someone like Gary there. But I don't know that was ever a Dave Aranda decision. Again, we've known he's spoken publicly about the respect he has for Patterson, but I don't know that was like Dave going into Mac's office being like, hey, it would be a good idea. I just don't know that happened.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. If it was sort of imposed on him as hey, things haven't been trending in the right direction. Let's get a veteran presence in here to sort of be a form of checks and balances. When we come back, I don't think Gary is actually going to coach ever again. And I'll get Cam's perspective on that shortly. We're doing a crossover edition. Locked on Horned Frogs and Locked on Baylor is your team every day. I do need to quickly tell you about one of our great sponsors, though, eBay Motors. I've said this before. I'm not ashamed to say it, folks. I don't know a ton about cars. I wish I did. I wish, when my engine's smoking or something goes wrong, I could immediately diagnose the problem, but I don't. But eBay Motors makes it simple for me. They have their guaranteed fit program, which means if I put the make and model of my vehicle in there, and this is the same for you, and then you find the part that you think you need, you put it in the shopping cart, they will tell you yes or no. And so you don't have to waste time with, is this the right part? Whatever it is that you need, whether it's to level up your car to peak performance or just to maintain your vehicle, superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, style, eBay Motors has you covered. 122 million parts for your ride. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And again, with that eBay Guaranteed Fit program, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. We appreciate eBay Motors for sponsoring the Locked On Network. All right, back here with Cam, Stuart. We appreciate you guys making this show your first listen. Quickly, I'll tell you about a show you should make your second listen. Locked On College Football. Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season with discussion on the upcoming season and the ever-changing landscape of college athletics, including conference realignment, transfer portal, NIL, new college football expanded playoffs, and more. Locked On College Football is available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. So when I was listening to this interview, I sort of came away with the idea of this is a guy that thinks he wants to work, but then he gets to work and he's like, you know what? I don't really want to work like that anymore. And he talked about playing golf. And I feel like for a long time, everybody's perspective about Gary, because he was always yelling and spitting fire and looked like he was on the verge of cardiac arrest most of the time, was that was a dude that was just going to, for lack of a better term, die on the field, or you were going to have to drive him out of there. He was a football lifer. That's what he did. But late in his tenure, like, he was doing the songwriting thing. He was getting more involved with his charity work in Fort Worth. And I don't know, Cam, I got this suspicion that I think he probably wants to be a head coach, but I don't feel like he wants to deal with everything that head coaches have to deal with now. And I'm not sure he has like the personality to be an assistant. So unless it was just a really can't miss type of a defensive coordinator job, I feel like he's done. But what was your thoughts when you were hearing him talk about maybe what's next for him?
Yeah, I kind of had similar thoughts in terms of, what else is he going to do? You know what I mean? Like he's already done the two rivals now in kind of an awkward thing. He's 3 years removed from being a head coach, and a very important 3 years in terms of college football. But he just came back to it over and over again. He wants to coach. He said it in the winter, and he reiterated again over the weekend. He said it in the winter before the Baylor job, and now again, he wants to coach. And one thing that did stick out to me is during spring ball, he was out there on the field. Like he was coaching. not just consulting players. He was coaching players. And he mentioned that a few times throughout the interview of how much he thought of the players, how he got to know them over the 6 months. So we as fans didn't see a lot, but he got to know the players pretty well, it sounded like. And with hearing all that, I'm like, this guy still wants to coach. And I don't know that it's going to be, TCU or Houston or Rice or anything like that. But I don't know that it would shock me if an FCS school takes a shot at him, which seems like, well, that's weird. But I think back to like a Howard Schnellenberger, for your college football historians, took Miami to new heights it had never been to in the early 80s. He went off to the USFL. And then like 20 years later, he took FAU to an FCS national championship and then into Division I. And so I'm like, could I see Gary Patterson doing that at somewhere like Sam Houston? Maybe. Actually, they just flipped over, didn't they? But you know what I mean? Like taking
I get your point.
From FCS or even a Division II. And, he's not there forever, but he's there a couple of years. He helps them make whatever transition they need. The recruiting game, and that is more similar to what he's used to than, hey, what's our NIL collective look like? What's our transfer portal options? I think he could do something like that because he is that much of a sicko that he could do that in whatever his 60s and take that next chapter. But I don't see it being like the next UTEP coach or a defensive coordinator at A&M or anything like that. I think to your point about the personality, I think the dude's a head coach.
Yeah.
Or an analyst, but he's a head coach. Like he's not going in there to be taking orders from anybody.
I mean, I could also just see, all right, you play golf and you do whatever kind of hobbies you have for a year. And then you're like, all right, I got a lot of time left. Hopefully, I got another 20. Yeah. Can I keep filling my days with this? And maybe he has a different perspective.
He did say he wanted to start a podcast.
I did hear that. Yeah. I mean, Locked On Horned Frogs, that invitation's open, Gary.
We threw out all the invitations of all my shows immediately. Like, hey, Gary, I actually think he could do something great like what Belichick's going to do this year, like the Film Room show. It's for a very select audience, but like who better than Gary Patterson, like talking defense, talking a little 4-2-5, like that would be unbelievable. But yeah, maybe it's just golf. I don't know.
He was really good. He did the national title Film Room broadcast a few years back. I can't remember what game it was, but he did a great job. I mean, it was, it's just talking ball. So it's live there on the TV. Yeah. It's just stream of consciousness type of stuff. I could definitely see him doing something like that. Okay, transitioning a little bit, because when the season ended last year, I would say the vibes for Baylor football were at probably a 0. Maybe that's generous. Like it was bad.
Yeah, if we don't include negative numbers, then yes.
And now they've gone through this total rebrand. I love how honest Dave is. Like he just came to media days and he's like, "Hey, did you guys hear about this NIL stuff? That's real swell. We're getting.
I think we're gonna start doing that.
We're gonna do some of those things, which is nice. And I guess it was over the weekend, and Cam's got an episode up about this right now. But the coaching staff was wearing T-shirts that said "Pay the players," and so I like, is this trying to combat narratives? Like, why are they treating it? Because I'll be honest, obviously this is with rival bias, but it kind of came off to me like an old person that found out about a slang term about 2 years too late, and they're just like kind of peppering it in every sentence, and you're sort of like, okay, you found out what that means, and now you want to show me you know what that means. What's the reasoning behind this sudden, like, hey, we get it. Like, we know what you guys want and we're open to it now. So please, offer us that grace,
Yeah. I really think it is a signal to Baylor fans more than anything else, because like maybe I'm thinking too deep into it. I read between the lines. I'm like, they're not saying like, hey, look how great it is we're paying players. What they are saying is like, all right, we get it. We're way behind on everything, but like now we're in this new college football world. We're paying players. We're going to be a little braggadocious about it, even though, I don't think it's going to show up on their wins and loss record this year, maybe a few years down the line. But it's to say, hey, we know we've been a little archaic. We've been a little draconian the last few years, and we have not stepped into this new college football landscape. But here we are. And so, yeah, I mean, if it were any other team, I'd be like, yeah, that's kind of cringy. We get it. Everyone else does that. But for Baylor fans, it's like, thank God, man. Like, thankfully, we've got the head screwed on straight, and Dave Aranda and his staff are in the year 2024 in this new college football that we have. And so I think it means, yes, we're going to pay players. We're going to give them a good offer. We're also going to use the transfer portal, which they've used better the last few months than they have the last few years. And we are going to embrace what this new college football is, which includes everything, conference realignment and NIL and whatever it may be. I see it as more of a bigger picture that here is what we are stepping into now. And hopefully at some point it leads to more wins.
Everyone's favorite rivalry name, the Blue Bonnet Battle. What is that going to look like in 2024? We'll discuss next here on Locked On Horned Frogs and Locked On Baylor, your team every day. All right, let's talk about it. FanDuel, you love sports. If you're listening to this podcast or watching it, you're probably really weird about sports. You talk about it all the time. You think about it. So why not try to make some money on it? FanDuel.com/Locked On or download the FanDuel app. And you might say to yourself, well, it's the middle of summer. All that's going on right now is Major League Baseball. Well, it's the perfect time to join because FanDuel is giving bonuses and boosts to their customers on a daily basis. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So before we go here, we got Cam Stuart of Locked On Baylor with us. I guess, what is so Dave's kind of on the hot seat here. Is there a win-loss record that you have in mind, Cam, that saves him? Is it more about showing progress on the field? Like, what are the benchmarks that you think he has to hit to keep this train rolling?
I think everyone has a different win-loss record. I say you gotta be in a bowl game. And I look at this roster and the schedule, and I don't see much more than 6-6 at like a high point. So there's enough question marks in the middle of this conference that the bowl game is a reasonable expectation for this coach to keep his job. Then again, from what we've heard in some certain stories, Sam Kahn Jr. wrote a really good one earlier in the spring about Dave Aranda's plan that he brought to Mac Rhodes. And that sounds a little bit more like progress on the field. And look, there's something to be said about progress on the field. If it's a second-year head coach, we're talking year 5. I'm done with, they looked better. They came out better in this game. They hung tough in this game. Baylor can't keep that as the standard. They can't, because, I mean, that's a lot of what they said last year. Well, we were in some games, or, we played a bunch of freshmen, because you couldn't recruit the last couple of years. That's why you played a bunch of freshmen. So to me, it does need to be a winning record. And it's not just, the boys showed some fight the last month. No, I gotta see a winning record out of this team.
Who's your favorite in the Big 12, Cam? Is it Utah for you? Are you going elsewhere? What do you think about this conference and kind of the parity-driven league that it's becoming?
Yeah, I love the parity, by the way. I do. I do really like Kansas State on paper because I'm an Avery Johnson believer, unfortunately or fortunately. But I have picked Utah because that schedule, man. That schedule is just too easy for first year in the Big 12. It's light work, man. And I'm not totally sold on Kansas, but I think Steven, we're somewhere in the middle here. And there's a lot of schools in the middle. Who do you have at the top?
Yeah, I mean, I like Utah. I like K-State. I'm with you on that. I feel like
want Utah, but
You want Utah? I don't know.
No, I kind of don't. No,
I
I'd
don't.
rather have Kansas State. It doesn't mean much to me.
Well, I got bad blood with K-State personally, but
I
I get your point. I don't want Utah coming in and immediately being like, yeah, we just run this place. I do believe everyone in the middle, and this is kind of a nice place to be, sort of has this idea of like, well, if like 2 or 3 things break our way, like
we're there.
We're in Arlington and we're playing for a playoff berth, which is really cool. I do think also, though, everyone talks about how easy and manageable the schedules are. And I'm kind of like, I mean, these are still like, I get UT and OU are leaving, and that's a huge thing. Yeah. But there's a lot of competitive, like 1-score games on these schedules. And so it'll be fascinating to watch it kind of play out. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to pick against the Utes, even though I'd love to see TCU go in there, middle of the season at night and just up in them. And I think that would be good for everybody. Probably not for you and the people that would be great. But everyone else would be great. Yeah. And before we go, I just want to say this. I think it's time, Frogs. Like, Gary needs to come back home. He's traveled the state. Yeah. He's kind of made his different stops. He's given his knowledge to other folks.
And hey, there is still a world where he has been undercover this whole time at Baylor.
Yes.
Like that's he could have sabotaged this whole thing for all we know.
Sleeper cell situation.
He could have been on the great espionage mission of TCU history.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. I know he was like I know he was taking food orders at one point, so maybe he was like,
that's true. Man.
Maybe he was doing some food poisoning stuff. I'm not sure, but
you did see him do that.
I saw him at Chipotle. I saw him at Chipotle in Waco, Texas. So, anything's possible.
You must have just got sick of that. I don't know.
Maybe so. And that's really what I want. I would love for like a month from now, Dave to just be like, yeah, he was actually trying to destroy us from the inside out. He was just the whole time.
Oh, it would be so bad.
And thankfully we found him out. But Cam, thank you. Tell the people where they can find you and all your assorted Locked On Baylor content.
Oh man. Yeah. That's at Real Kim Stuart, 2 T's in the last name, on Twitter. And also at Locked On Baylor. Now we're back the last couple of weeks, 5 days a week. We're building up. We're also going to do some Big 12 previews throughout this last month here. So I'm going to have you on at some point. We'll talk a little bit more in depth about this TCU season and just whoever you want to see around the Big 12. And if, whenever there's a bad Baylor loss, your Horned Frogs fans can come over and watch me just blow a gasket, man, on the post game or the next couple of days following that. So look, there's enough for all of us here. And I will certainly be listening to Locked On Horned Frogs when the shoe is on the other foot. That's what we do. This is what college football is all about.
Yeah, I hate listen and I hate watch. Counts just the same.
Great.
So
it's great.
Do your thing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cam. This is the Locked On Horned Frogs and Locked On Baylor crossover edition. Your team every day.